Coming up.
I can tell you right now that the way that China subsidizes these industries, especially their EVs and their steel and their aluminum, and it's not just the subsidization, it's the questionable trade practices and it's questionable labor standards that they have. This is a real big threat to that trillion-dollar trade relationship we have with the U.S., but specifically the auto manufacturing relationship we have.
One component of this genocide is a horrific forced labor, ongoing targeting.
Mr. Jenius.
Point of order. This does not relate to the 1064. Let's stay on topic.
This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
Madam Chair, thank you very much for convening this meeting. We did fill a 1064 through the Standing Order 1064, sent a letter to the committee, the members of the Conservative Party and the NDP, to have this meeting today. And what we feel right now is we're dealing with potentially the greatest trade crisis of our time. We have two fronts that are facing us right now. On one hand, we have what seems to be a close relationship with the U.S. that is cooling. And we've seen an announcement, everyone saw the announcement last week where the U.S. almost doubled the softwood lumber tariffs onto Canada. Even though Canada really has had a great trading relationship for a long, long time, $1 trillion worth of trade between the borders, about the largest trading relationship in the world. And of course, we had a U.S. $52 billion announcements for battery manufacturing assembly in Canada, which those batteries are assembled to cars manufactured in the U.S. And when we talk about what's at stake here, it's jobs. 2 million jobs are attributed to our trading relationship with the U.S. directly and indirectly. And the auto industry is the one specific we're focused on that employs 500,000 people in Canada. It's an industry worth $18 billion to this country. And this industry right now is under threat because, on the other hand, what we face is a contentious relationship with China. We've had allegations of foreign interference. We've had unfair trade practices. And when we talk about EVs, aluminum, and steel, and I'm still the competition critic, I can tell you right now that the way that China subsidizes these industries, especially their EVs and their steel and their aluminum, and it's not just the subsidization, it's the questionable trade practices and it's questionable labor standards that they have. This is a real big threat to that trillion-dollar trade relationship we have with the U.S., but specifically the auto manufacturing relationship we have. The stakes really could not be higher for Canada's economic future. We talk about the money invested, but we ought to talk about jobs. And the Americans didn't hesitate to protect jobs and industries. Canada right now and Canadians are waiting 3 months to hear whether the Canadians are going to mirror the tariffs that have been put on those industries that the Americans made that announcement back in May. And the Americans didn't hesitate. By not matching tariffs, we risk being seen as a weak link in the North American supply chain. Hesitation drives away investment. And retaliation, of course, is something we look at, but it's not something we can avoid by being passive. In fact, our inaction invites further aggression from countries like China, who will see our delay as weakness and capitalize on it. We're not going to be able to stop the amount of cars coming in. Tariffs don't stop EVs from coming into Canada. They'll certainly, though, slow them down. And we risk certain effects as if these vehicles enter Canada and they find their way back to our U.S. market, we further aggravate that Canada-U.S. relationship. Canadians deserve to know why it's taking so long to protect their jobs and industries, and it's been 3 months since the U.S. implemented these tariffs. How much longer will Canadians have to wait? The government must explain why it's dragging its feet when our economic future is at stake. The consultation the government conducted, and we've talked to quite a few of the stakeholder groups involved in that consultation, has been thorough, but it clearly isn't comprehensive enough. And certain stakeholders have stated that we haven't covered, for instance, data. And the fact that these vehicles coming into Canada and the U.S. are conducting a comprehensive study right now, and we were studying part of that in the industry committee with C27, is what these vehicles, the data that Canadians will give them, where it's stored, and what it's used for with state-owned China. Secondly would be the unfair labor practices, and thirdly would be the broader economic impact. Canadians deserve nothing less than to study this trade crisis, and therefore, Madam Chair, I read the following motion to the committee. That given the risk of heavily subsidized Chinese-made electric vehicles posed to over 600,000 Canadian workers in the steel, aluminum, mining, and auto manufacturing industries, as well as risk to the $52.4 billion of taxpayers' money the federal government has spent on corporate subsidies for the electric vehicle industry in Canada, the committee began a study of at least 8 meetings into the impact of tariffs on local industry and use of trade remedies to protect against Chinese electric vehicles, with 4 meetings held before September 30th, 2024, and that the meetings consist of 1 2-hour meeting with the Honourable Mary Ng, Minister of Export Promotion, International Trade and Economic Development, and officials from Global Affairs Canada on the issues of tariffs and impacts on local industry. 1 2-hour meeting with the Honourable Chrystia Freeland, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, and officials from the Department of Defense. 1 2-hour meeting with the Honourable Francis Philippe Champagne, Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, and officials from the Department of Innovation, Science and Economic Development. 1 2-hour meeting with the Honourable Melanie Joly, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and officials from the Department of Global Affairs, and at least 4 meetings with stakeholders deemed relevant to the subject. That the committee request copies in both official languages of all submissions made to the federal government's public consultation, which ran from July 2nd to August 1st, 2024, on protecting Canadian workers and electric vehicle supply chains from unfair Chinese trade practices. That the copies be sent to the clerk for distribution to committee members prior to the commencement of the study. That the committee report its findings to the House, and that the committee immediately report to the House of Commons that the government immediately match the United States tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, steel, aluminum, critical minerals, and EV batteries and battery parts, and remove Chinese-made vehicles from all federal electric vehicle subsidy and rebate programs.
Mr. Williams, do you have that available for the committee members in English and in French?
Yes, Madam Chair, as far as I'm aware, they've been submitted to the clerk
Thank you very
electronically.
much. If you could get that distributed so everyone has it in front of
We
them.
will do that right away.
Look, it's no secret that the government has always been there to grow industry, protect workers. And, we're number 3 in the world after the U.S. and Brazil for foreign direct investments coming to Canada. That means industry and companies from all around the world are coming to Canada to set up shop, creating thousands of jobs in the EV sector alone, as we heard earlier today. Over $50 billion have been invested by companies, and that's attracting workers, thousands of workers to set up shop. Last week alone, Goodyear announced roughly a $500 million investment to create hundreds of more of jobs for tires that will go on some of these EVs. So definitely we're there to make sure that we're protecting workers. There was a consultation period that just finished, as my colleague mentioned earlier. It was roughly a 30-day consultation period that we want to make sure we hear from industries. As we know, previously there were retaliatory measures from China that impacted a variety of sectors, whether we're talking about agriculture, we're talking about steel and aluminum, and so we want to make sure that we do this right. And so this is our number 1 priority for our government, to make sure that we do get this right. When we look at the EV sector in my riding alone in Brampton East, Stellantis is creating hundreds of jobs and making electric vehicles. We'll be soon making electric vehicles there. And so we want to make sure we continue incentivizing the industry to set up shop here with tax incentives like in Budget 2024 to continue growing the industry. And we're seeing that across the board, and no doubt about it that workers are looking forward to seeing more of that, and we want to make sure we continue to protect the industry. But coming back to what the Conservative Party is saying about jobs and workers, of course it's important to us. What we've seen in the past when Pierre Poilievre was a cabinet minister was over 40,000 auto sector jobs were lost during that period. And we want to do the exact opposite, to protect those jobs and keep them in this country. And so coming back to this motion here, there are some, I agree it's an important study and we should be doing it, but definitely there are some minor corrections that we need to think of, and I want to get those on the record for the members that are on video as well. So on the third line, you'll see risk roughly over $50 billion of taxpayer money the federal government has announced. We've got to remember this is not money that's spent. This is tax incentives that were given by various governments, and they will be accumulated when some of these companies start producing products. So I think the word spent has to be changed to announced. On the last, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So on the 6th line down, you're going to see.
Just a point of order, Madam Chair. I do want to clarify: is an amendment being moved, or are we just hearing sort of a discussion about prospective changes?
Friendly amendment.
That amendment can be distributed while it's being moved.
Yeah, it's a friendly amendment, changing the word
amendment.
spent to announced. I think it's a friendly amendment that
So I'll get all the friendly amendments on record and we can discuss.
Yeah, if somebody wants to discuss them afterwards, then you can discuss it afterwards.
Yep. So the friendly amendment is changing the word on the third line from spent to announced, because that's what it is. On the sixth line down, with 4 meetings held before September 30th. Look, the House is going to resume. We got to be flexible in terms of committee scheduling. So I would say with 8 meetings starting on the first day back. I don't know when the House resumes, but Madam Chair, I assume that we'll be sitting the first Monday we come back. Yes. So we can say with 8 meetings starting on whatever that date is. And that the meeting consists of, I know we have listed 4 different hours with 4 different ministers. It might just be easier to just say with meetings that consist of, Minister Ng and officials, Minister Francois-Philippe Champagne. I'm not sure if we need Minister Freeland here. As we know, Minister Ng is on the trade file along with Minister Francois-Philippe Champagne on the Team Canada-US engagement strategy. So that might be beneficial for our members to hear that. So we might want to just readjust and add 2 ministers there, Minister Ng for 2 hours with officials and Minister Francois-Philippe Champagne for 2 hours. I don't think we need to specify 2 hours. We just mentioned the ministers' names and alongside officials. And then, so that's 1, 2, 3. And then my 4th friendly amendment is we have to respect commercial confidentiality when industry gives us submissions in terms of feedback during the consultation process. So I think we need to add the words subject to commercial confidentiality and national security considerations, because we are talking about ensuring that Canadian interests are protected. And so I think those words should be included. So the words, again, for the clerk are subject to commercial confidentiality and national security considerations after practices on the 4th line down. And then my last friendly amendment is, if you notice the bottom where we are saying that the government immediately matched the United States tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, et cetera, we're kind of presupposing the study that we're going to do. I think the recommendations will tell us what we need to do after we hear from industry and ministers. So I think that bottom section needs to be gone. So that should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. On the 7th line down, immediately report to the House of Commons, period, and nothing else after that. And that's what I have.
Sorry, Chair, just another point of order. I'm not trying to be persnickety here, but there's a bunch of different amendments that are proposed. The term friendly amendment was used. That doesn't exist in the standing orders. A member can propose an amendment, or they can propose a series of amendments, and things can be adopted by unanimous consent if it exists. If not, things have to be debated. So I'm just... It's all one amendment, and if so, it's now subject to debate.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments.
I know we don't have a friendly amendment, but something our side would be okay with to change that word. And if you want to, and I'm just going to announce, of the 4 that are announced, the only one, the main one we have contention with is just removing some ministers. Each one of these ministers has a part to play with this trade agreement or with the relationships we've mentioned. Each one of those ministers is responsible for these trade agreements and the seriousness that comes with this. So that would be one that we would not be prepared to vote for. But if you want to start, Madam Chair, with the First Amendment, then I'd be happy to hear from the rest of the committee.
So Mr. Williams has said he has no objection to changing the word spent on the 3rd line to announced. So if I don't think anybody has any objection to that.
I would like to propose that we ask for 1 hour per minister, so we could have 2 meetings instead of 4. And I would propose that we have 3 additional meetings after that instead of 4.
So Mr. Savard-Tremblay has suggested that the ministers be appearing for 1 hour rather than 2 hours. Mr. Genius, your hand is up. Do you want to speak to what Mr. Savard-Tremblay has suggested?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. And it seems like we're being a bit more informal, which is fine. I'm a sub here, so as you wish in terms of proceeding. In terms of the proposal from Mr. Savard Tremblay, I do think having the 2 hours available for ministers makes a lot of sense. A couple caveats that obviously exist with that. Number one, the committees don't have the power to compel ministers to appear. So if we ask a certain number of ministers to appear for 2 hours, there's the possibility that we won't get them for that time. There's also the possibility that we won't get them at all, and it is what it is. I do find that in a 1 hour period, you have, in any committee I've been on, you have the process of getting organized. The minister provides their testimony, and then that leaves fairly limited time to actually get through the remaining parties. It means that not every person who's a member of the committee even gets to ask a question typically, unless they're splitting rounds. So I do think that the 2 hours is important for providing substantial exchange. Now, I think all four of these ministers are important. Whether all of these ministers will show up for the time allotted seems fairly unlikely, and I can speak to why each are important. And I think I'll have a chance to speak more to this later on, maybe. But I think there are many different issues that are engaged. There's economic issues, the impact on Canadian workers. There's also strategic issues, human rights issues. So I do think having the Deputy Prime Minister, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and having sufficient amount of time to ask questions that cover some of those distinct themes. What's the impact on Canadian workers? We're also talking about various different industries, right? So there are likely specific issues with specific sectors. So to be able to drill down onto all of the different sectoral impacts, as well as the strategic and human rights issues, to do that in 1 hour does not seem to me to be sufficient.
Okay.
And I do want us to be able to cover the different themes and different kinds of meetings, which is why I think the length of the study is appropriate. That'd be my take.
Thank you. Reality is you cannot compel the minister to be here for 2 hours.
What normally happens when you ask for a 2 hour meeting, you get 1 hour with the minister, 1 hour with officials. Mr. Champagne has been most gracious. A lot of meetings, he'll give us another 10 minutes, depending on how important the topic is. I think what I would respectfully ask for is we try to get the 4 meetings. It doesn't mean we're getting the minister. As Mr. Genius noted, we may not, but I think this is such an important topic, allowing these 4 ministers to be available. And what they do is they bring officials. So they're deputies who normally are more knowledgeable on some of the bigger issues. I think the government's going to be interested in trying to explain a lot of what's happening. I think a lot of us for opposition, we're going to try to get a lot more answers onto what is happening. I think for the democratic process, this allows, I think, the most amount of time to be available, not just for the ministers, but for the departments, to be able to come and answer to the public what is happening. As we've stated, this is not a little issue. This is the major issue right now in Canada. And I think the second one is Mr. Tremblay has said 3 meetings, which would be 7. I would respectfully ask if perhaps he'd be open to saying to setting a meeting, but being open to more meetings if that became a priority for this committee, meaning that with the subcommittee, and I know that we've stated if there's an emergency, I know we have 106.4s to if there are major emergencies and we know other things happening, but I think the request I'd ask if he could respond would be that if we found we need some more witnesses in a certain subject, or we're finding that the situation has evolved because we don't know now, but we're going to know probably in a week from now or 3 weeks from now, if he'd be open to having that open-ended. So I'd maybe ask Madam Chair if he's on the speaking list to speak to that.
Going back to my colleague, Mr. Garnett-Genius, he mentioned that, of course, the committee can't compel ministers, and we need to be flexible. So maybe we need to add the word, invite ministers and or officials for that 4 hour period. You want to cut it down from, I see, 4 meetings to 2 meetings. And Mr. Tremblay, that might be an idea to consider. to add the word ministers and/or officials.
Is everybody okay with having the 7 meetings? And the officials will be here with the ministers for their meetings. Everybody's okay with that? If nobody's objecting, I'm assuming everybody's okay with that?
Just to be clear, 7.
It would be the ministers coming for an hour and then the officials for the other hour. And that's the 4 officials that are listed.
So then we're cutting down industry stakeholders because it was be 4 and 4 before.
Yeah, well, it's, we've got Jolie, Champagne, Freeland, and Minister Ng.
No, but I think it's important to hear from industry. So anyway, Terry has his hand up.
Terry. Okay, you know what? I'm going to suspend the meeting for a few minutes while we try and sort out a few of these things because it's going to take too long and we're not going to get anything accomplished today. So I'm just going to suspend the meeting for a few minutes while we try to get clarity on what it is, how we're moving forward, so we all understand it. So if we could just hold on. I'm suspending for a few minutes. My apologies to everybody online. It's frustrating here, and I'm sure it's more frustrating over there. So Mr. Savard-Tremblay, you had made some suggestion. I'm going to ask Mr. Williams to, who has had discussions with you as well, if he would like to clarify what has been agreed upon.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to everyone who's online, committee members and public. Certainly you want to have all these discussions in public. Obviously, there's a lot of nuance to this, so we're in the spirit of good faith and talking about this publicly. This is what we feel is the best amendment to this. We've agreed that we would have 1 hour for each minister that's been listed to attend the committee. There'd be 5 meetings held in total. 5 meetings, and the rest to be filled by stakeholders pertinent to this study. And if there were further meetings required based on new evidence or based on a priority that this committee would find deemed acceptable, that those will be added. But for this committee, it would be 5 meetings, 1 hour per minister and officials each, and the rest filled with stakeholders. Stakeholders would fill the rest of those slots. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Tony, I had you down as the next speaker, then Mr. Aria, and you're speaking to the motion that's in front of you as agreed upon, that's been amended. So, Tony, do you have anything to add to this?
Madam Chair, I'm sorry to jump in here just with a point of order, but if it's been agreed upon, then aren't we done discussing it?
I wish we were. No, I don't believe we can say that we've agreed to a couple of changes and amendments in that part of it. But we still have members who want to speak to the motion as a whole that's been amended.
Maybe we're agreed, but okay.
But I wish you were right, but we're not there yet. Tony?
As well, Madam Chair, should we not discuss those proposed changes on the other aspects of this motion before we go to the general comments of the full motion for approval or adoption?
I think you can speak to the whole thing as amended.
What I think he's suggesting is that Mr. Sidhu had.
Yeah, there are further recommendations to amend.
Yes.
Yes, Madam Chair. There's 2 more recommendations, as I understand it. One is going to be about, and I think Mr. Sheehan was trying to interject on that.
Yes. Was
the copies of the clerk of the public study.
Yeah.
If we can look at that, and the last part of that was our ask for this report to the House of Commons. So if we can deal with those 2, I think we'll be done the meeting today, unless anyone else has talked after that. So if we want to talk to the first part, you had Mr. Sheehan on the call. He can speak to that. I know Mr. Sidhu had spoken, and I know Mr. Sheehan's going to speak about the commercial interests of that. We're prepared to have an amendment show, and Mr. Sidhu perhaps is talking to that committee members perhaps only have access to that public consultation that was finished on, I think, August 2nd, and that committee members have access to that perhaps in accordance with other best practices of other committees, where we, through the clerk, where we submit our phones as a side and can go and view those documents as parliamentarians that we'd be okay with that part of the motion being amended. Mr. Sidhu, though, you had that amendment originally.
Okay, so before I open it up for full discussion, we're going to see what other amendments then that we agree upon on this last part of the motion. And so I'm going back to you.
And that's what I had originally proposed when I first spoke. I wanted to add the words "subject to necessary redactions due to commercial confidentiality and national security considerations." As we heard from Mr. Sheehan, that's important to protect Canadian interests. If someone's giving us feedback about our consultations, we shouldn't be just putting it out on the internet. And I think that's probably the best way to do it. So the second line after the date, July 2nd to August 1st, 2024, I would add those words. And I'm happy to go to a vote so we can...
Well, I think everybody, does everybody understand what has been suggested here now?
So point of clarification, Madam Chair, I think we're at the point right now where we're saying that we're okay as a committee, and Mr. Sidhu mentioned that to follow best practices as committee members, go see the public consultation, but obviously it's based on the commercial sensitivity not to have that public, and we're okay with that. If that part's okay with everyone, we're good to move on.
And then
The wording that,
Yeah.
has the clerk got the, have you got the wording that Mr. Sidhu mentioned, subject to best practice and
Yeah.
to deal with confidentiality? Okay.
Agreed.
All right.
So, Madam Chair, the last part is if Mr. Sidhu, when he brought his amendments, was to eliminate the line that states that the committee immediately report to the House of Commons that the government immediately matched the United States tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. So understanding that sometimes, or based on the clerk's findings, that sometimes that's not there, I'd recommend that we just have a quick vote on this one. Why we feel it's important from the Conservative side is when we look at our trading partners, when we look at the spirit of the committee and the spirit of thought about what we want to send as a message to the Americans, what Conservatives have stated is that we do, and obviously we're doing a study on this and there'll be a recommendation come back to the House, but in the spirit of that, before the study starts and commences, that we make that statement to show that we believe in that we believe that tariffs should be there, that we match the Americans. So we're prepared just to state that we'd like a vote on this last amendment that Mr. Sidhu has made. We believe it should stay in. Mr. Sidhu believes it should be eliminated. So respectively, that's okay. We would just like a vote on that right now.
My advice would be that it's perhaps asking you to do two things in one. I don't know that I go as far as saying that it's procedurally out of order, but I would suggest that you...
Do you want to just have a vote on it?
Yeah, to strike it out.
Okay.
Report the findings to the House and then strike the rest of it out.
Okay, so Manny, you've got the floor.
Yeah,
What are you
so-
suggesting?
Yeah, as I originally suggested in my first intervention, that we remove all the wording after report its findings to the House. So period, that's the end of this, and then we remove the next three and a half lines after that.
Okay. Did everyone hear that clearly? All right, I'm going to call for a vote on that as requested by Mr. Williams then. All right, and Mr. Clerk, would you please take the vote?
Certainly, yes.
We're voting to strike it out.
Yes,
Yeah.
the question is on Mr.
Mr.
Sidhu's amendment to remove all the language after and report to the House the final statement in the motion there. So that would be the question, whether to remove. So a vote yes would remove that language from the original motion. That is Mr. Sidhu's amendment. I'll proceed to the vote. Mr. Uria? Yes. Madame Faultier?
Oui.
Mr. Mao?
Yes.
Mr. Sidhu?
Yes.
Mr. Sheehan?
For.
Mr. Baldinelli?
No.
Mr. Genuis?
No.
Monsieur Martel?
No.
Mr. Williams?
I'm damn funny. No.
Monsieur Savard Tremblay? Oui. Mr. Cannings?
Yes.
6, 7, that's 7 yeas, 4 nays. So that carries, the text is removed.
So Mr. Sidhu's amendment carries. This part is deleted from the motion. Are you okay? We've got enough? We'll be ready for, you want to speak or not? Please speak. You've got the floor. You're next on my list.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. With respect to imposing import duties, my life has come a full circle. I was born in a country which traditionally had very high import duties to the tune of 200 to 300%. It was a poor country. It remained underdeveloped. I did not know that then. But being not part of free trade, trying to protect the domestic industries through artificial barriers of import duties, protecting the domestic car industries, protecting the domestic two-wheeler industries, it remained underdeveloped for decades till it started reforms, economic reforms. It is quite interesting to see the developed countries like United States, Canada, and European Union now coming back to moving away from free trade and imposing duties on the products, various imported products to protect the domestic sector. Anyway, the impact of this, we don't know what it will be. Better experts, much more wiser people than me can predict the future under this new regime of moving away from free trade and through the use of import duties to protect domestic sectors. Second, to my colleagues who have been asking that we follow the United States immediately in imposing the import duties on the Chinese electrical vehicles, I have this to say. Canada is not United States. United States is a superpower, major economic power, major military power, and any country, every single country thinks twice before they retaliate against any move that United States make, including imposing import duties. But we are not United States. United States looks at international relations, even though they have major political differences with China. They have got ongoing good business relations, business-to-business relations with China. Major top officials of United States regularly visit China. While emphasizing their political differences, they also focus on enhancing the business and economic relations. But we are not US. We have to think that any move to impose duties on Chinese electric vehicles will certainly result in retaliation by China. So we have to be clear, which domestic sector are we willing to throw under the bus to impose this? Is it the canola growers who export to China? Or the beef exporters? Or the pork exporters? Or the palm oil exporters? Or the soybean exporters? You know, in the agriculture and agri-food sector, I think we have exporting more than $7 to $8 billion to China. We have got a surplus of over $4 billion in our trade with China. But we have to be ready to see the retaliation and willing to confront now in advance which of these Canadian exports to China are we willing to sacrifice to impose these duties on electric vehicles. Good that we're doing a study. We should call all experts. We should call the Canola Growers Association. We should call Canadian Agri-Food and Trade Alliance. We should call the experts who can guide us on how the imposition of import duties will affect our competitiveness in the medium to longer term. And I know you guys want to call the steel and aluminum sector people who are the biggest voices in this demand. But we have to remember that steel and aluminum sectors, all companies in Canada are owned by foreign companies. And these two sectors, they don't export to anywhere else in the world from Canada except for United States and Mexico. So they don't care if China or any other country imposes duties on Canadian exports to those countries. But here we are trying to protect the most protected steel and aluminum industries. and they get the biggest voice in these discussions. Anyway, I'm glad that we are conducting a study. I know my views will be in minority, but we need to, I'm glad we are going to invite the experts, the various exporting bodies, the sectors, bodies representing the various Canadian exports to different parts of the world, including China. Hopefully they'll be brought in. We can listen to their concerns, their views, their thoughts, and also listen to the experts who can say how the moving away from the free trade, how using the tariff to impose, to protect the domestic sector, how it will play in the long-term health of Canadian economy, Canadian sectors, and our competitiveness. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Do we need a recorded vote? We don't need a recorded vote. Okay? Everybody's good with that?
Motion as
So,
amended is
so adopted, motion's adopted?
The motion is,
Thank
the
you.
motion as adopted, it's adopted. We know where we're going with this. I'm sorry it took so long for us to get there, but we are. Mr. Genius, by the way, congratulations to Mr. Genius. I was worried
you.
one time about multiplying the world, and now I know we have you here. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that. So the motion is passed, I understand. I did want to make a few comments about the study, but I didn't want to do that before the motion had passed because I wanted to make sure we got that done. So given that it passed, I did want to add one comment about just, I think, the importance of the work that we are doing here. I appreciate Mr. Williams putting forward this motion. I agree with everything he said about the importance of protecting our economy, protecting Canadian workers. There is an additional piece of context, and that is the nature of some of these supply chains as they are coming to be dominated by the PRC. 3.5 years ago, Parliament voted to recognize that Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples in the PRC face an ongoing genocide. The Government of Canada has yet to join Parliament in recognizing that genocide. We would certainly hope to see that recognition soon. One component of this genocide is a horrific forced labor, ongoing targeting
Mr.
Uyghurs.
Genius.
Point of order. This does not relate to the 1064. Let's stay on topic.
Just give me a moment here to.
Okay, I'll give you know what, because I understand, I'll give you a moment, but it isn't related to the 1064, and it's been a strenuous afternoon here, and
Okay, all
so
right.
please, I'll give you back the floor for a bit to finish your comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's just saying that when we talk about the fact that the PRC is coming to dominate the supply of electric vehicles, the risks associated with that, those are risks to our domestic sectors, but they're also risks in terms of human rights. That so much of the critical minerals that are coming into the new battery economy, they're sourced in ways that are absolutely deplorable.
Absolutely.
The government and I think this is an important part of the context of how we understand the importance of these tariffs. I think it's important to.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm getting some feedback from the floor. I don't know. I thought I had the floor, but just to say that the human rights dimensions of the EV supply chain are critical. The conditions in sourcing in the DRC, as well as issues of forced labor in the PRC, are things that I think we should be seized with as well. So I'm very supportive of this tariff policy and the hearings that we're going to have. I think they're important for Canadian workers who, in the present climate, without effective measures to combat forced labor in our supply chains, are effectively being forced to compete against goods that are produced through slave labor.
Yeah.
That's not fair to the victims of that slave labor, and it's not fair to Canadian workers. So I'm looking forward to this study. And then I had one other comment, which is that maybe we should set a witness.
I agree with everything you've said so far, and I don't want to have to cut you off, but I do have some committee business that I still have to give direction to. So you and I can have that discussion anyway, because we both think similar to that point. To the committee members, 2 weeks to get your witness lists in, so that the clerk will have sufficient time to get our witnesses lined up. 2 weeks should be sufficient time for everybody to do that. Okay, all in agreement. So I thank everybody, especially those online, for your patience on your end. But I'd have rather been on your line and on this line. But at least we got the job done. So thank you all very much. Meeting adjourned.